Hey everyone, Stephen here. I've just finished editing the episode you're about to hear, and we had such a fun time that at the beginning of the episode, as I was introducing our guests, I actually forgot to mention their names. So I'm going to tell you now, it's Jeanene, Tracy, and Stephen Hunter from the YeahYeahYeahNahWhat podcast. Also, they were in Melbourne and Sydney, respectively, while we were here in New Zealand in the Reality Hub studios. So you might notice that Rob and I experienced just a little bit of internet connectivity issues with audio at times, but it's mostly pretty good. So let's go there now and enjoy the show.
I used to travel there when I was in a former life. When I was married. I used to live in Matamata. So Matamata.
Matamata?
What's the Matamata?
What is the Matamata? Shall we start, shall we?
Hey, why not? If you're good to go.
Okay, let's see how this rolls. And welcome back to Reality with Reality Hub. Today on the show, we've got a couple of guests, two New Zealanders living in Australia who are the hosts or co-hosts of YeahYeahYeahNahWhat podcast, which you can hear on Spotify. We recently spoke about them and how much we enjoyed their podcast, and then they spoke about how much they enjoyed us. And hello, guys, we're all together.
Yay! Hey, hello. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. And I actually checked up when you said you couldn't find it on iTunes, and I realised I only put 2 years on the iTunes one. So instead of yeah. So it should be back on iTunes again now. But anyway, but thank you.
That's right. So for the listeners, that's 3 years, a nah and a what.
Go for the trilogy, the triple trilogy.
Nah, what?
And are there any spaces between those years and nahs?
There's no time for space.
It's all one word.
Yeah.
It's one word.
Yeah, no, it's important if you're searching for it. That's how you find these guys.
And who came up with that title?
Oh, I think that was a bit of a collab, wasn't it, Steve?
Yeah, nice. I think the yeah nah thing came up, and then we just I think the whole what thing was based around, what is going on in the world at the moment.
I know, yeah.
So we just thought, and it's a good way to do something generic, and which also means that we can just basically spout whatever we like without doing too much research or being too specific. So it seemed like a good idea.
Now, because that's a real Kiwi thing. Is that right?
Very
yes.
It's in Australia, but it's mostly a New Zealandism.
A New Zealandism.
New Zealandism.
I think so. And they do use it here. I did a movie recently. It was this crazy horror comedy. It was like a cross between The Castle and Shaun of the Dead, and it was with like Gary Sweet, and there was such a awesome cast, and there was a whole segment about the yeah nah. So Australians kind of take it like Pavlova and
they do.
That other kind of stuff.
They're good at stealing.
They steal.
Like
they steal.
Well, I mean, it says a lot if they're stealing from us, because obviously they're stealing quality. So, who
they
else?
They take the best stuff.
Exactly.
And they stole you guys, and now you're over in Australia. I mean, Jesus, Australia.
Oh, wow.
All the best stuff.
It says a lot, doesn't it?
Well, do you remember what Muldoon said with people leaving to Australia?
Can I, before you say that?
Yeah.
My name is Rob, and my mother named me after the then Prime Minister, which is, I don't know if many people know that, but it's a true story.
This was going to be a great joke.
It's not a joke.
Rob Muldoon said with New Zealanders going to Australia, it raises the IQ of both countries.
Yes.
I do remember that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's true.
Very
it's
clever,
actually true.
actually.
Yeah, he was a very wise man. Rob, you've been named well.
Yes.
I'm glad.
I actually worked with Rob Muldoon for a short time. I was a producer at Radio Pacific, and I used to produce the 5 a.m. till midday, which is just a nightmare racing show. And then I think on a Sunday, he did a show called Lilies and Other Things. And the panel operator who he had on his show was a complete arse. And he essentially, he had the level so low that the air check tape kicked in. And he left like 10 minutes before the show was meant to finish. And then I was fielding all these calls for about 20 minutes thinking that something had happened to Sir Rob. And he just buggered off. He thought, no, don't bugger this, I'm out. And that was my one meeting of Sir Rob Muldoon.
Wow.
That's crazy. So Steve H., you being an actor and talking about all these movies and stuff, and you've met some pretty diverse people. Were you always interested? I know, because I know Jeanene very well, but were you always interested in sort of global events or questioning reality and just being curious about those things?
I think it's something that developed, and it kind of developed over time. I mean, I became an actor when I was a kid. I used to go to Morrinsville College, which is, not far from where you guys are, and I always thought I was quite insignificant, which is probably why I got into acting, to try and get, to get liked,
Yeah.
or to be, that was my survival mechanism, really, was to get into acting. So I don't really think I had great opinions, because I don't think I valued my own opinions very highly. But as I got opinionated, and especially as I became a bit older, I certainly have, I enjoy it. I enjoy the to and fro. I enjoy a bit of battle and conversation. So, and I think I've got a very low tolerance of, injustice as well. And it's quite clear there's a lot of that happening at the moment.
I think we're right in the middle of one of the, I don't know, it's just flashpoint at the moment, just events.
Yeah. And I mean, what an incredible time for us to be talking. Our two podcasts seem to cover similar kinds of topics. And here we are, we've completed a period of COVID, because I feel like that's come to an end, really. I mean, that's how I feel. I know there's more to come with that, probably, in terms of the tail out end of where that's going, and tracking apps, and how we still keep a distance from people. But now the next thing's happened, which is this major, the death of poor old George Floyd, and protests taking place around the world. And I was really keen to ask you guys, have you seen any news on that in Australia? Because it all of a sudden popped up in New Zealand, like quite really to my surprise, where suddenly two influential media types, one is Paris Goebbels, who's the dancer choreographer who's become famous for being J-Lo's choreographer. She's a Kiwi. And Stylebender, who's famous in UFC, and he's a Kiwi. I forget his full name.
Israel Adesanya.
Both called for people to go and protest at Aotea Square and head on down to the American embassy. Anything like that happen in your country at the moment over there?
Nothing's. I mean, well, pubs have just opened at Victoria, so they're very preoccupied with that.
We're so focused on other things right now, eating and drinking.
I haven't seen any protests as such, but it's obviously it's hit home here what's happened, and I'm a strong believer that this has been going on for a long time. People have been protesting, but I think the biggest thing they're protesting is the response from the leadership. The orange bozo, and he has completely fueled this. He's completely thrown gas onto this whole argument. And I think that's what people are so angry about, that it's not the fact, because it's like if you go into a shop or you have some sort of service, and if something goes wrong or something happens, you get upset. But if people turn around and you can see that they care and they want to fix it, then all that concern goes away. But the fact that there is no concern whatsoever, in fact, he's trying to fuel this, I think that's what people are really protesting about. And the anger is also built with the fact that we've gone through, the whole world's gone through a couple of months of complete trauma with this pandemic. So I think it's just completely boiled over. It's been the perfect storm.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to wonder, if this had have happened in Jacinda's backyard, for example, what the response would have been. Completely different. A leader who has no empathy in the US, who's clearly has a very strong agenda, and has no room for compassion for a nation that should be one nation, but clearly not, right? And he is exacerbating it. He's making it so much worse than what it could have been.
Just as an observation, when you think, I don't look. I was brought up in New Zealand, but we're very influenced by the American culture and the media, and so we get brought up on it through our TV screens when we were younger, and now it's instant through social media. And I was actually watching some of the coverage over the riots in LA in particular, places like Fairfax and Long Beach and Santa Monica, and all these looting going on. And there would be these peaceful protests with the right intention, and then they would get sabotaged by these extreme sort of anarchists. And I just feel, as an observer, that there's just some real deep-rooted systemic problems that are not just in the world, but in America, like United States. Are they truly united as a people, as one? And it's just, if you're coming from an intention of respecting, loving, and honoring your fellow human being. You're just not seeing that. These systems are just either corrupt or they're corrosive, they're damaged, and it's, I don't know, it's like this has been happening and it keeps flaring up, and then just this recent incident has just completely sparked it up again and brought it into the media and public.
And it's almost like there's this deep underlying anger and frustration, right? That's coming to the fore now. And Steve H., you mentioned, there's been 2 months of this intense chaos that's been, imagine there's been boiling up inside, and then suddenly there's an avenue of expression for it, right? On top of this thing that's been festering for generations and generations. Is it now time to speak up and to be heard? Because now there's almost like this gateway of, the leader is I guess creating a space for people to actually explode, because he's not being compassionate, or he's not actually understanding the true problem, right? Which you're right, Rob. This is very systemic. There's a real issue here that has never really been healed.
No, and from what I gather, just from what the media have been saying, I was watching NBC4. They were doing like live coverage, particularly in the LA area, because I was kind of focusing on that area because I've got friends that live in LA, and they've been social media, posting the events, and it's just crazy because it's absolute lawlessness and the deep economic impact which is happening because of Corona. And now you've got all these businesses and they're on curfew, and it's just crazy. It's just like, from an outsider looking at it, you think it's just so wrong. And I know everyone's going to have their own opinion on it. But yeah, and in this day and age, because we've got social media, we've got instant access to, everyone's carrying these smartphones and videoing all the stuff that's happening. It's so crazy, man.
You're mentioning divisiveness and, and the separation. I think that's been there for a long time. It hasn't been a united country in the States for an awful long time. But what's changed now is that, it's like having a pimple and you just keep picking it. And what Donald Trump is doing, he's picking the pimple the whole time, and he's using it, and he's actually creating that division. He's making it even bigger, and he's purposefully picking on that and creating this division that has always been there.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you step back, that whole divide and conquer, that whole you versus me, that's been around for a long, long time, create that separation and get people opposing and fighting each other. That's part of the human condition, the polarity of life. So I don't know, there's always going to be good and bad. There's always going to be ups and downs. But you see this being played out just everywhere. This whole divisiveness. So there's not this unity. There's not this kind of cohesive, and it's almost like it gets manipulated in some way as well between the left and the right.
Where do you guys see this heading? What resolution do you see happening with this, or will there be a resolution? What do you think?
I think it's either bringing everything to the surface again, where it somehow it can be healed, right? Or I don't know. I'd like to think that it's in our hands, that if my way of, people often say, like, what can I do about it? I said, you can do a lot, because everyone has their own unique skill set and talent. So your talent may not be to be a leader and to address a big public crowd. Your talent may not be to join a protest and to protest peacefully. It might be you're a great writer and you can communicate that way. It might be the little things you do each day by loving, supporting, and honoring the people around you, and that creates the difference. So it's not necessarily something you don't always have to say. It brings the power back to you. You can do this, like us just doing this podcast here and communicating how we feel and sharing our thoughts gives other people the power or the strength to do that as well. So that's the way I look at it, and I think that's changed over the years as well, where I say, I'm just going to have a voice and give my opinion, and I'm always coming from the intention of, can we heal? Can we transform? Can we reach to a new level of being so that we can look at this and go, hang on, this is all wrong, and set an example that way?
Do you think then, because it kind of feels like the pendulum has swung, pretty high in one direction, and if you think about the sabotage that's happening, people are torching their own communities.
Well, that's right.
And it's insane to think that, they're taking away what is important to them through making a statement, right? And it just shows how much anger and frustration they're carrying to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's like energy. So that anger and frustration's got to be expressed on some level, and then when you get that herd mentality and that collective, and it may be organized. It might be just a small group of people that are doing the bad stuff, and 80 to 90% of people are actually got really good intentions. But
which I think that's probably the case, right? Because generally, as human beings, we just want an outcome. We have an intention. We don't want to hurt someone. We hurt someone through expressing our desired outcome.
Yeah, it's our own inner wounds.
Yeah.
And if you have hate within you, whatever's contained in you, I mean, we've all got those aspects within us as a human, but if you're overwhelmingly you have a grievance, if you're suffering on some level and you feel wronged, you need an outlet. Unless you can transform that and go, hang on a minute, I'm going to work on myself and not express this, and I can actually express the opposite. I can express the good stuff and put that out into the world. And that's when you start changing things. But this is going to some deep waters of the collective consciousness but we're all affected by it on some level. So we can see that through Corona, just how that affected us globally, and so it shows you on a physical level that everything is connected.
So when Rob and I were listening to your podcast that afternoon, Rob had helped me move some heavy items from our apartment because I was doing a bit of a house move. And so it was my turn to buy pizza, obviously. And we were sitting in the car, and Rob goes, so my mate Jeanene, she's got this podcast, and it's YeahYeahYeahNahWhat. So we go, well, look it up, let's have a listen. And so we're sitting there listening to the two of you going, oh yeah, oh I love it, oh so good. And then Jeanene had a rant, which I just
never. I don't do that.
You got to.
You go, girl. because you said I'm going to paraphrase very loosely, Jeanene, but it was something like, something else is going on here. I'm really concerned about the civil liberties of people being locked down. And you put on your conspiracy hat, and I think, Steve, you put on your reasonable hat. Went, now, Jeanene, that's probably not. Come on, are you a little bit? Where's your tinfoil hat? But so and I thought that was a really cool dynamic. But I'm talking to your tinfoil hat now, Jeanene. When I ask you this, with all these things happening, do you think that it's a distraction from maybe something else that's really going on in the world, because we're being shown one set of stuff? Well, we're being displayed the right hand whilst the left hand is hidden and it's doing something. And I can't help but wonder, the instant disappearance of COVID from the news, now it's this drama, and everyone's right up against each other's faces protesting, and it's as if it was never there. Just like how I remember the Australian bushfires suddenly disappeared when the next event happened. I can't remember what the next event was, because the bushfires were significant, but it made it just eradicate from the news.
Kobe Bryant?
Maybe. Could have been.
That's true.
Yeah, for a while.
I mean, I don't know if that speaks to the news cycle, or if it speaks to how people are pushed around globally in their thoughts, and pushed to another concept to not see what's really going on as civil liberties are eroded. What do you think of that?
That sense of control, right? There's always a controlling hand playing out. And, I agree with you, Steve, is this distraction happening. And Steve H. and I just had this discussion yesterday. We were saying there's always something. And was COVID just a distraction to the next thing, right? And so, as I'm hearing you talking, I'm thinking, wow, we were in such chaos. It was so chaotic and traumatic, and it was such a deep sense of removing liberties from self, right? It's a huge sense of control. And then suddenly wait a minute, we can go everywhere, do everything. There's this whole other thing happening in the world, and suddenly this is not significant. How is that possible? How can we be so deeply embedded in the pain and then suddenly, hey, it's like it never happened?
100%.
To me, that's very concerning. There's still going to be a sense of control. And I went out for dinner last night for the first time since COVID was in shutdown, because in Victoria we were allowed to go out for dinner last night. So my daughter and I went out. As soon as we sit down at the table, Steve and Rob, you're going to love this because you know how I feel about this. There is a laminated piece of paper on the table with a bloody QR code to scan the QR code and register my information. And I go, what the? And my daughter says, what are you worried about? What are they going to do with it? And I was like, what are they going to do with it? Oh, my God. I had to take a deep breath.
Which, by the way, it happens every time you go into an RSL club anywhere in Australia. You pop your license in.
I hate
Of course
that.
you do.
Yeah.
I don't know about this.
But I complied. I brought up the QR code, entered my name. There was a moment where I went, fake number, real number, fake number, real number.
Yeah.
I went with my real phone number.
It's interesting when you talk about like things sort of disappeared and, is it a distraction? But, the fact is we live in a soundbite society, and I worked in the news media for a long time, mainly sports. It was the fluffy end. There was a nice light sort of style of journalism on radio sport. I was there for about 5 years. And it's like news changes when people are getting bored of COVID. Oh, there's something new. Are we going to keep banging on about COVID again? Or, hey, look, there's cars being blown up. Let's promote that, because from a news perspective, that's way more newsworthy. So from that perspective, as far as I'm concerned, and, when we think, this is not important anyway, it's only not important because the major news outlets have moved away from it. It doesn't mean it's gone away.
True.
And it's completely driven by the news outlets. And now, of course, you can make the argument like who's controlling the news outlets. I mean, it's very easy to tell, for example, that, Fox News and it's like Sky News here are also, they're the buffhead right-wing media over here, like Fox News are in America. So, but we know that. But like,
doesn't that show you the herd mentality is that we are being driven in the direction that the news and the media want us to be driven in. We are thinking the daily chaos through being directed to think that, right?
Yeah, but also the news media produce what we want to get. So the more we click onto stuff, the more they'll produce it. So it's like, who's driving it? Are they driving, or are we driving it with our own appetite?
Good point.
Yeah.
And I think as humans,
Oh, that's kind of woo woo, Steve, because that's a little bit like that whole thing of being told, well, companies won't produce things with fake chemicals in it if you choose not to buy them. If you go organic, they'll start making things with natural products in it, and you go, oh, it's on us. And I think on a cosmic boom shanga level, that's so true.
Yeah.
But
it's so
also
cyclical, though. It's cyclical. How do you say it? So cyclical, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there's something about us as humans where we're drawn to controversy, we're drawn to drama, we're drawn to that car accident. We kind of, there's something about us where I don't know if it's that dopamine hit or stimulus, but I feel like we're addicted to that. As you say, Steve H, the news bite, that next thing to keep us on edge, to keep us stimulated. The next Netflix show.
Is that an entertainment thing, or is it a deep desire thing?
I think it depends. I think it depends. Like it's like watching a train wreck, as they say. Oh, it's like watching a train wreck. I can't take my eyes away, but I also can't take my eyes away from people having a fight in the street. I'm like, Jesus, look at that, because something primal in me goes, oh, danger! You can't not watch this. There's so many levels there, and it's and then you get people who are really peace loving mung beings. And, I wouldn't be into that. Who then turn on who would say bad things about a UFC fight or a boxing fight, but they can't stop watching it once they've accidentally clicked on it. They're just transfixed.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking from a psychological perspective, right? Our main priority, or our main I guess the duty of our unconscious mind is to protect us and keep us safe, right? And so when we're observing something like that, it could be that the unconscious part of our mind is going into, shit, Do I need to prepare for fight or flight, right? Do I need to get ready to run? Do I need to hide? What do I need to do? Is that the attraction? Is it an emotional, unconscious protection response? Or is it purely because wow, that's interesting? I get there's this innate human desire to keep safe. And if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, our basic need is to keep safe and be secure before we can do anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was that whole thing.
It's maybe, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, it's the thing of like seeing someone in despair, or like seeing someone go through some hard times, or, funniest home videos, seeing a skateboarder fall on his ass. We love watching that kind of stuff.
We do.
It's all that kind of stuff. And,
why?
and
okay, let me ask, why? What does it give you? Because I'm curious about this. What does it give you when you see someone fall on their ass?
Maybe it makes you feel better. I mean, there's a great quote from Oscar Wilde that, it was sort of paraphrasing that when a friend of mine experiences a success, a little part of me dies, and it's the reverse of that. It's kind of the reverse of someone else. It's like, okay, maybe my life's okay.
Yeah, true.
And it's why all those absolute shit reality shows, which I'm an actor, so I'm completely opposed to all the reality programs, are so popular, because people want to see the drama, that they want to see the chaos, they want to see someone dumping somebody. And, and of course, the great joke of these programs is that they're not real at all. They're completely manufactured. Like, all those things are manufactured. They put people in situations to create these things, the way they edit them, put someone in front of a movie, which is real life.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of a bit boring.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's an aspect of ourselves where it kind of makes us feel better. We're all fallible, we're all imperfect, and sometimes there is something within us when we see, whether we want to or not, we get some sort of amusement or even satisfaction of seeing other people screw up. Maybe it just makes us feel better, and maybe it starts at school. I reckon it starts at school.
What's the one phrase that we always used to say at school? What was the one thing we always used to say at school? Sucked in.
Sucked in. Yeah.
That's so Kiwi, isn't it? Sucked in.
Yeah.
So I reckon it's all programmed from an early age.
I find it really interesting. I'm a fan of the Joe Rogan show, Experience, I should say. And he talked about how many of his friends who were really left-wing and quite virtue signalers in a lot of ways about what they believed in, when the COVID-19 thing hit over there in LA, they were all calling their friends going, how do I get a gun? I want one now. I didn't want one before. I think they're bad, but now I want to know how I get one, because I'm afraid. I'm really, really worried. And all the right-wing people are like, well, we told you so.
Shoot the virus. Shoot the virus.
What are they going to do with COVID, with a gun?
But maybe look, I mean, I know it sounds funny from our perspective at this end of the world, right? And I think we're both of us, although you guys are in Australia, we're all really at this end of the world. We're so divorced from the shit happening up in the top half of the planet that maybe they got a point, because they can sense the mood and the environment. And look what's happening in LA. I mean, and look all over the country. It's just out of control. Yeah. We don't sense that here, so we go, why would you need that?
Well,
and then how many guns have been pulled out right now, right?
Yeah, there were business owners that were allowed to come down to their stores that were being looted to protect. That's okay. You could go down there apparently and have
with a gun.
With a gun, I believe so. Yeah, I mean,
well, it's got to be an amendment right of some or other.
It is
kind
one of
to
their
protect
amendments
yourself.
to the right to bear arms,
protect your property or whatever.
And I think that was born way back during the Civil War. I mean, excuse my amazing
1776 and all that
American history.
Yes, but it's phenomenal. You should really teach it.
I know you're
should be teaching that shit.
Yeah. But correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of the people the right to bear arms is this whole thing that if the government, which is happening now with their, the National Guard, that they can defend their property and defend themselves and their family. Is that right? That's the whole reason behind it?
Well, I think at this point in time, what's going on is their concern for their safety.
Martial law and safety.
Which is quite different from the other concern for tyranny of a government telling them how to live and controlling them, which is that other amendment that allows them to rise up against it. Yeah.
I think that a lot of Americans have forgotten that the right to bear arms was at a time where people just used to be shooting each other. There were no laws, and the only way to protect what you wanted and the only way to get what you needed was to use your guns. And it was the Wild West. And I think they've kind of forgotten that, the world has evolved since then. Now we have laws, we have, police departments, and society has completely changed. And they're still holding on to this whole concept of arms, and they can't see that it's actually detrimental. I mean, they can't see the impact of it. I mean, you could do a whole podcast on the whole arms thing in America. It's just ridiculous.
God, it's so nuanced. It's so nuanced. I want a world full of peace and no one fighting each other, and yet part
love
of me,
light and unicorns
and mung beans.
Do you actually though?
Mung beans.
Do you actually?
Boom shaker, Jeanene. Do I? I don't know.
Wouldn't you be bored? Would you be bored? I mean, if we just had the conversation about being attracted to that train wreck,
True.
If there was peace, how would you feel? Really?
Well, on a cosmic level, maybe I would be in the wrong dimension. Maybe I need to be here to play out all this shit.
That's where all the drama plays out here on Earth. Yeah, the human drama.
Yeah.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah. And is our desire matched with our true desire? Do you know what I mean? Like our logical desire, is our logical desire congruent with our true innate desire? I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
Explain further. Do you mean between
Spoken
your
like an acting coach.
your authentic being?
Well, even
Let's
so
take a breath
the thing that we think, if you think about, there's a lot of research that's done around, perception of what would I do in this situation. Okay, so let's say there's the three of you. Okay, guys, if someone stormed into your house with a gun and you had a gun close by, would you pick it up and shoot them? Now, in your response, logical response, you would say yes or no. Then when that actually happens, your response would be different, could be different. Now, I would say, so I used to be a bank robber. It was fun as an actor, okay, and as a trainer. And so we would have these simulations. And so I would come into a bank and get on the effing ground. We've already told these people, when the bank robber comes in, make sure you follow direction, okay? Don't effing look at me. Don't effing look at me. I've got people eyeballing me, and I'm saying, don't effing look at me. They know it's a simulation. And they are still looking at me, even though they said, I won't look at you, I'll look at the ground. So our perception of what we will do and our actual reality is often different.
What if they're enjoying your performance, though?
What if they can't stop gazing into your eyes?
She's like, wow, she's so good.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's an instinctive response, and like in the acting world, because I teach as well acting, and we call it your actor's self makes everything mean everything, whereas your personal self will stop that. It'll stop those urges to conform to society. And if you sort of look a bit further down that rabbit hole, it's almost like we try to be polite around people. This is going, like, I guess even from a deeper level. You're talking about our response to things. Like, on what level do we respond? I mean, I'm doing a course at the moment, and it's talking about upgrading our conversation, upgrading conversations in life, because a lot of times, and this is particularly pertinent, you mentioned about Jacinda Ardern. She's being an adult. She's being a complete adult in this situation, whereas Trump is being like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. And whatever happened to him when he was 8, or whatever happened to him when he was 9 or 10 or whatever, that is playing out still, because the narcissism, and it's all about himself. And you think, is he really concerned about the well-being of all his people? Well, obviously not. He's concerned about himself. But what causes that? And I mean, you could do years and years of self-development courses to get into that. But, a lot of that, and a lot of what's happening in the moment, if you just ask them, like, where's this conversation coming from? Who's talking right now? Is it an adult, Jacinda Ardern, or is it a petulant child, Donald Trump?
Yeah. I mean, it's about doing that inner work, right? And the different stages of your life and the trauma. It's all trauma-based stuff. So if you're in a child is wounded on some level, then that wounded child will come out at certain times because it needs healing and attention. So you're right. Yeah, it's a really good observation.
And even if we perceive that we're wounded, because quite often, and if you guys have done any of these kinds of courses, there's a perception that we're wounded, there's a perception that there's problem, whereas in actual fact what happened was completely different, but we just made it mean this kind of stuff. And meaning is a massive thing. Like in acting, it's all about we have to make stuff mean stuff, whereas in our general life, and especially if we're working on ourselves, developmental, it's taking the meaning and taking the significance out of life. And which is quite funny. Like I've done quite a few self-development courses, which is all about it doesn't mean anything. But then as an actor, everything has to mean everything. So, my household can be a bit of a roller coaster sometimes, especially if I'm prepping a role.
What mood is he in today? Do we approach standoff?
You're absolutely right, though. Yeah, because we as human beings, there's no inherent meaning. We ascribe the meaning. We attach meaning according to why, and that's part of the human complexity. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, we attach meanings to things,
and it's usually based on our experience, right? And
totally.
and most of the time, 99% of the population are oblivious to it, and it's only when you do these self-discovery courses that you, or sometimes, some of them you don't even learn through them, because if you're not ready to learn, you won't, right? And so there's this whole the perception of who we are is often different to how it plays out.
I was talking earlier about I didn't really get who I was, and I didn't give myself significance. And a lot of that, that's the kind of thing where it plays out. Like we don't get that we're 100% responsible for everything we do. And we just think this is just the way I am. I'm just shy. I'm just the way I am. You think, well, hang on, you weren't always shy. I bet you weren't shy as a 3-year-old. You're shy because of things that have happened to you, and that's fine. It can be traumatic. Sometimes it could just be the minor things, and then we create our own reality. We create and I've got no doubts that Donald Trump is a fight or flight, and the reason that he's so uber successful and he's got where he wants to get is he's trying to prove something, and he's trying to fight against some way of thinking. But the thing is, if you try and confront this, if you try and ask a lot of people, that they'll resist it immediately, because they'll go back to the reversion, which I guess a lot of people is that I'm not good enough and there's something wrong with me, and no one wants to go there, which is why I think people resist that kind of thing.
Okay, I'm going to throw something else in here because it's really intriguing. You're talking about Trump, and he is on a mission, right? And so my curiosity around this is when someone is so focused on proving their story to be true, because the way I see it is we create stories and then we spend our lives proving our stories to be true. And let's say, for example, I've got a friend who thinks that men don't find her attractive. And so, every man she meets, she's like, oh, he doesn't like me. I've been with her when I've seen a guy hitting on her and she hasn't seen it.
You can't see it.
How did you not see that? She's like, oh. But my thing is, if Trump has a story and he's proving his story to be true, is he then, this could be a controversial comment or question, is he then at fault because he is, in his mind and on his journey, he is living out the story and he's trying to prove the story to be true? And let's think about some other leaders who have been like that. What about Hitler? Were they wrong, or were they purely living through the pained child and the stories that they'd created? It's a really interesting conversation. Right?
It's absolutely his fault because he hasn't evolved. He hasn't evolved. He hasn't seen that, and he hasn't grown up.
Yeah. And so when does a person become invited to evolve and grow up? When they don't have the capacity to see that or understand that that's actually a part of their journey.
Do you guys see that in your own kids? You've both got kids,
Yeah, totally. Ages. I think I've got a 9-year-old, and she'll come home and she'll act out. She's a model student at school. She's even told us so. And and then she'll get really angry, and she'll get like really angry, super angry, and it's up to us not to react to that, but to find out what's really going on. and then we'll work out that something said something, or and like school. After having a child at primary school, I'm just learning how brutal it is. I mean, someone has a birthday party and you don't get invited, but two of your mates do, and then you come home and you act it out, and you have that hurt. Like it's. I just want to go down there and like it's brutal, and it's quite heartbreaking to see, but.
It's no wonder we have so many participation certificates in society now, because we all give a shit about how people feel,
Yeah.
There's that fine line though between, wanting, because you want to fit in, and that it's a difficult time in your life because you're trying to find out what the world's about. If you're not receiving love and attention in your home life, you're trying to find it in the external world. It's a real tough place to be. And that's why, at school it can be very, you can either shut off from that and become very insular, and then that's where a lot of problems start to develop about who you are and what you're all about. And it's a tough one.
And then that journey to prove yourself, right? To belong to the tribe. If you go back to our ancestors, it was about being a part of the tribe. And if you weren't a part of the tribe, you had nowhere to live. You actually died.
Different. Totally. It sort of reminds me
of the same biology.
Actually, Jeanene, it's sort of a little bit like what life was like being so disconnected from the world during this pandemic in New Zealand, where we had quite a considerable lockdown, I think, compared to what Australia's gone through.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because did you guys have we had levels? We had different levels, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 was you have to stay at home. You can only leave for supermarkets shopping or to go to the pharmacy.
That's
we
right.
had the same, but we only went to level 3. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, so you did have 4 levels as well.
So you could still go you could still go out and were stores open or businesses? Few?
Yep, stores. Yeah. And the big difference was you could go out and, like, our pizza shop was always open. We could get takeaway pizza, and the bottle store was open. I mean, there would be riots. There'd be riots to like what America's having if they close bottle stores in Australia. But that was always available. Whereas
as takeaway, not as dine-in. Yeah.
Yeah, always as takeaway, but I know that wasn't an option because my brother's stepkids, they got a fish and chip shop over in the Coromandel, and they had to close. They couldn't provide that service.
Non-essential. Yeah. So it was surreal in some ways to have a whole city on lockdown. There's literally no traffic and just a few people out. It was crazy. You'd go to the supermarket and you would get there in minutes. There was no traffic.
Amazing.
And everything was just everything just shut down. Everything just decompressed. It's a surreal experience.
We definitely didn't get that level. And one of the things that the Prime Minister here said was that if you have a job, that's considered essential. So there were certain people who were still commuting to work. Yeah, and
just any job is essential.
Well, yeah, but of course it was up to the business to make that decision as to whether they closed or not, whether it was at risk. Are we putting our employees at risk by being open? The one thing I found intriguing the whole way through was the whole hairdresser thing. Like, that was considered an essential service, and they're actually touching their clients.
Not here.
Doesn't make sense.
That's like saying a massage therapist is an essential service, which in some
so they were closed. All beauty treatments were closed, but hairdressers remained open.
For 30 minutes.
I had a conversation with a hairdresser, and I said to her, how do you feel about this? And she said, it's really strange. She said, we're not officially touching the skin, so it's okay. It's like, but you're touching the hair, and you're certainly not 1.5 meters away.
I was doing a film. The whole way through.
No, I've just found an article here online. COVID virus stops working during hairdressing appointments. Oh, there it is. Makes all complete sense now. Yeah.
Notable article, but no, it probably exists.
Probably does.
There's so much confusion.
There was so much confusion.
So many countries are just making up their approach to it.
But there's confusion in Australia.
Unprecedented.
Your favourite word.
Every state in Australia has got a different rule, and that's the other confusing thing. Like, the government said, we're going to do this.
Do you know you just touched on something. When I was watching all this NBC, all the coverage of all the reporting going on, I realized that everyone is just a human being doing the best they can, even if they're in a position of power, whether you're a president or a prime minister or an expert or a scientist. You're actually going, they don't actually know what's going on. They're making this shit. No, it's true.
It's so true.
Making it up.
Yeah.
And someone else will have a different opinion and they'll say something different, go, okay, yep. But whoever's got in charge, that's who we follow. That's what I saw through all that and went, holy shit, these people literally do not know what they're doing. And if I was in that situation, I wouldn't know what I'm doing, but I would make something up and make it sound convincing. And because I've got a title and because I'm an expert and because I'm on this platform, then let's just go with this, shall we?
100%. And you know what's really concerning about that is that whole familiarity template, right? So when you're familiar with someone, you trust them and you believe them.
Yep.
And so, how much of that was going on, right?
So much of it becomes fear-based too, because you'll have places where masks are essential versus other places where they're not. You'll have the World Health Organization, that entirely non-corrupt organization, that tells you that masks are not needed. And you go, okay, tell me why. And then they'll quote some research.
There's a famous quote, to mask or not to mask.
To mask or not to mask. That makes
That is the question.
Because it's so inconsistent, like you were saying, Steve, inconsistent even within Australia's major states. That blows my mind.
Was there talk of some states opening up to New Zealand before state to state?
There is now, like, because New South Wales is pretty much opening up. Victoria is opening up. Queensland.
Victoria never closed. Neither did New South Wales, right? To Australia. But to international, we still invited people into the country. Invited, no, that's not the right word. People were allowed to come into the country, but they had to go into lockdown in a hotel for 2 weeks, which is what is still happening. And in New Zealand, I understand as well, right?
Yeah.
But Queensland are still refusing to open the borders to the rest of the country. It's going to be
another month at least another month before Queensland opens. So there's a prospect, but I really can't see unless, the cases get to zero for a good amount of time that, New Zealand's going to go, come, let's do this. But, there's things happening like people from overseas with dispensations if they're doing essential work. I see James Cameron and John Landau that they're doing Avatar. They're in the country, and that's going to bring. I know people in the film industry and how much that's going to bring a
huge amount of wealth.
I completed a whole feature film during that whole COVID situation that they filmed a Hollywood feature in the outskirts of New South Wales.
Can you say what it was, or not allowed to talk about it?
Well, if you go into IMDb and there's some articles in the newspaper, a guy called Lucas Foster who produced Ford versus Ferrari, and there's a remake of Stephen King's Children of the Corn. So if you looked at that and looked on IMDb, you'd probably see my name there. But, it was a miracle, and they went through all the protocols. And you talk about hairdressers. We had to go get our makeup done and all that kind of stuff. And
so it was all the protocols. With the social distancing.
Well, I mean, you could have two people at a time together. So you and the makeup person, and you distance between everyone else. So, and I think the lucky thing was that they pressed on, they got it started, and then things started to loosen up. So they completed the film. It wrapped like last week. I finished about a week and a half ago, but it wrapped last week, and it was just, I think there was that and a film in Iceland, and that was it.
And you played Calvington.
Calvin.
That was quick.
Calvin.
I'm impressed with your searching skills there, Steve.
Thank you. I just brought IMDb up. It's very good, Steve.
Thanks, Jamie.
So I'm interested, actually. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm interested in what you see happening with those countries who played ball, who towed the line, if you like, suddenly saying we're going to open up to each other, but we're going to refer to Sweden as one of the bad boys of the COVID-19 game because we won't open up to them, and that's what's happened in Northern Europe, where neighbouring European countries have said, okay, we can start travelling again, but we're not letting people travel to Sweden because they did nothing.
Right.
Which I still thought was pretty brave, to be honest, and an interesting experiment.
I personally think that's going to happen in New Zealand. I think, if you think about the biosecurity laws that New Zealand has, probably the strictest in the world, or one of the strictest in the world, I think New Zealand will definitely be doing that, be very, very specific about who does not enter the country.
Yeah, and if they do, it'll be essential travel, and it'll be hand picked. It won't be for tourists, not on a bulk level. There'll be the 14-day quarantine for everybody. From the film industry, I've got one film that's on hold that was meant to be shot in Brisbane, and the lead, she's from the United States, so we need to get her out of here. There's another TV show that's about to restart, I guess maybe the end of July, or I don't know. At some stage it's going to start, but the lead is from the UK, and so they have to get over that barrier of getting them there. But it's already happened. I mean, a couple of UK netball players arrived in Australia a week or so ago to start playing netball. So I think there's going to be a situation where they can, and because the government here, Scotty from marketing is intent on keeping the economy open and intent on creating business and making money. So that's, I mean, beside the fact that they completely betrayed the arts in this country, which they have done for some time. So it was just a bit of a rundown. Like there's this thing called job seeker, which basically means job keeper. No, it's job keeper is a payment to businesses so that they can continue paying their employees. Now, anyone who works in the theatre or TV industry, I think that you had to be employed for 12 months or more beforehand, but no one gets employed for that. So there's a massive section of the arts.
Oh, that is betrayal.
The crew, it's absolute, and they've been left in the dark. And I understand Jacinda is, they are looking after the arts in New Zealand, but it's
they have, haven't they, Rob?
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah, there was something about that. Yeah.
No, they have. I think plenty of people I know, from personal trainers through to people who work gigs at nightclubs or casinos and all kinds of things, have been eligible for a payment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but there was some other.
She's just given a few $1 million to the arts. I saw.
Yeah, XY millions. Yeah. 175 millions, wasn't it? Yeah, that's huge. But then our arts is not. I don't know. Is it as pumping as yours? Do you guys have more regular work than actors in New Zealand? Which side is the grass greener, do you think?
Look, I think so because, it's bigger and you've got some big hubs. I mean, Melbourne's probably arguably one of the biggest hubs, especially with the live performance.
When you think about the population, you've got the audience, right? Yeah, so when you've got the audience, you've got the gigs, yeah.
But it was no surprise because, this government hasn't given a shit about the arts for a long time, and they've cut funding to the ABC, and, that I was a teacher at an RTO, which is a registered training organisation, and they do vet fee help, like student loans. So, they loan to do courses, and they cut about 50 out of 80 like acting and performance classes because, quote, the arts minister said, we don't want to fund people's lifestyle choices. That's what they think about the arts.
That's ridiculous.
Do not get me started.
Wow.
Jesus, that's crazy.
That's what's the word for that?
Totalitarian.
I have many.
Don't get Steve started. He'll give you a dictionary of words, and they won't actually be appearing in any dictionary.
Well, we've got the explicit.
Well, yeah, we've got the E on
the
Yeah. No, on our podcast, all the parents know that there will be fucking swear words on this podcast for sure.
I think my favourite of the favourite of the whole pandemic at the moment has been a recent one, cockwomble.
Cockwomble.
I love that. And what does it mean? Are you wobbling?
I don't know. I just like it. I just like it. It's,
could you put cockwomble into a sentence, please?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Great Uncle Bulgaria and Orinoco went for a walk with their little-known cousin, Cockwomble.
Oh, I love it. That's precious. Going back to the question that you were asking, Steve B., what's your opinion in New Zealand as to, because you guys are in there, you're hearing the news over there. We're making an assumption that New Zealand will have strict biosecurity laws and but what are you hearing on the ground there? What do you think? Who do you think will be coming?
I'll tell you this much, that there is some talk about the PM today will talk shortly on cabinet about the possibility of moving to level 1 earlier than expected. Because there's just
what is the expectation right now?
Much later than wanted, I can assure you.
It was going to be, I think, June 22nd, which is still a few weeks away. But they want to put it earlier because there's just this pressure because there's no COVID cases. It's this whole.
We've gone 10 days without it. Right?
Yeah. Entirely. So it's like, what's the hold up? What's the point?
I think we've had one active case.
11 days, no new COVID cases. Yeah.
And that 11 days, no new cases, with one active case, which is someone recovering from their sniffles at the moment. No, I'm sure it's bad, but it's also really interesting when you see leaked reports coming out of organizations, because I'm interested in that sort of thing, that says that the whole global response to this has been totally overblown. There's a major German report that was recently leaked that talked about 3 key areas where governments have gone wrong and caused damage to their own ecosystems in various ways. I don't want to harp on that too much because that's my tinfoil hat talking, but I find that really interesting, and it's made me actively reconsider the way I vote, because I'm very much left-leaning and arts and all that sort of stuff focused, but I can't help but feel that this length of time in a restricted state that not only has all these negative side effects on people and the way we treat each other in society, but also has this tremendous destructive effect on our livelihoods for the future. I'm worried about what's coming down the pipeline in terms of people's well-being and businesses thriving, because that affects all of us. And I mean, I'm an arts guy. I do plays and voiceovers and things like you guys do. But I can't see people turning up if they don't have jobs to pay for tickets to support what we do. So it's everything is interconnected, and there comes a point where, even though I'm very much left leaning, I've got to look at the right and go, they've got a point. We need to keep moving again. And it worries me that she's been so easy about, no, we'll just stay longer. Yeah. I want more critical thought on that. I really do.
It seems to be being pushed out way too long. And at the moment, there are still restrictions for all these businesses and gatherings and stuff, even though we just had a protest gathering of a couple of thousand and there was no social distancing or anything. It's like, well, why aren't we at level 1 now? Why weren't they being prosecuted or told, It's just so weird.
So in hindsight, as New Zealanders, do you feel that you shouldn't have gone to level 4?
Well, there's two arguments to that, isn't there? There's always going to be the two.
Okay. I mean, if you ask me, I think I take the approach that what Australia did was probably much more measured. I really do. Oh. And I wish we had gone that way. Now, I know that's funny because I hear Australians going, oh, you guys, we're so proud of your Prime Minister. It's like, yeah, cool. Jacinda's lovely. I know people who know her. I'm sure she's a really good person. That's what I hear. But in terms of a government, personalities aside, deciding that we should have gone into such a level of lockdown, I think a level 3 response, which is what you did, was more measured, and it puts you in a better agile position to then move forward with your economy again.
I think it goes back to what Rob
bootstrap this thing up again,
Yeah, I think what Rob was saying earlier is that, you've got these people, even leaders of countries, who have absolutely no fucking idea what to do, and so they're getting all of this contradictory. You think we're getting contradictory information. You imagine a leader of a country getting all of this information and having to, as a cohort, it's not just her or him deciding what to do, but as a group, they're going, fuck, what's the best bad option? What can we do best for the country? So I can imagine whether they, regardless of what any leader did, would have been seen wrong by a major proportion of the population.
I think it's going to be a few months. It's going to be a few months before we know the impact of that. I guess the thing what I'm seeing from New Zealand is, yes, they took a harder approach, and in hindsight, they might have gone too much with their restrictions, where our rates, like per head of population, are actually better in Australia than in New Zealand. But at the same time, our economy and things are going to go open a lot slower. So New Zealand has the opportunity, if they eradicate this, to open everything like fully, quickly, and go and open up a lot. Whereas, like the chances of having tourists in this country from overseas, that doesn't look likely for quite some time. Of having really big events, like
we're drip feeding, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think New Zealand's going to be on their feet earlier, and they're going to be able to get the economy running fully. So it's like instead of walking, they've actually stopped for a rest, but they're going to have a lot more energy, and they're going to be able to sprint to the finish.
This sounds like a familiar fable, the tortoise and the hare.
true.
Yes. I was thinking of that.
You know, I think we are the lucky three. You know how you often refer to Australia as the lucky country. In this instance, the lucky three will be Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, because the information I'm hearing about this so-called bubble of this trans-Tasman bubble, and then another report coming in on the news saying, actually, maybe New Zealand will open up preferentially to the islands before Australia.
Oh, okay.
That's all talk, because ultimately all three will open up together, in my opinion, around about the same time. And we're the lucky three.
When do you think that time will be?
I think by the end of the month, honestly.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, maybe sooner, because of what Rob just said about things opening up on the 25th coming forward now.
Well, there's talk about it, yeah.
Look, if there's talk about it, it's going to happen.
I think it's going to be confirmed at some point early on, but it sounds like what you're describing is like the Hunger Games. You know, the South Pacific region is like one faction of the world.
Yeah.
You know,
and Greece. Don't forget, Greece also requested to be part of that bubble.
Really?
Oh, did they?
Yes.
Are you kidding?
Greece made a request. No, that they said, you know, we know you're going to do a bubble, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands. And Greece has invited all our countries, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, to go to Greece and to be part of that bubble.
And what's the reasoning behind that?
I recall something about that. Well, it's about tourism, and it's about at least having some Europeans come to our countries. Look, I don't mind that. I mean, if I just put on my my mainstream hat, that all sounds pretty good. And I think
but you can cross border though easily. European borders are not very strong. Like you can.
You would have to test that, wouldn't you? You'd have to make sure that Greece wasn't allowing other people within from their neighbouring countries. But whatever bubble we end up getting, the world is going to point at us and go, look, they did it right. And they're going to use that to probably feel bad about themselves, which I don't like, to be honest, because what we went through was a major system of control, and my tinfoil hat says, and then they're going to use that to say that's what you guys should have done to lessen their civil liberties, to say next time you should do what they did because they did it right.
Oh,
yeah.
And the next chaotic control mechanism, there will be easier
look to New Zealand.
Implement.
Yeah.
You know, look to New Zealand, because when they had a terrorist attack in Christchurch, well, they instantly bought all the guns back. Now, what are you going to do? And so they're using us in this way as a
guinea pigs,
a puppet of example. Look, they're doing the right thing, and that's where I know what is really unpopular to say that, but I can't help but see that playing out, and I see it. I see us being talked about in that way.
It's New Zealand. I used to hear this growing up, that we were a testing ground for a lot of things.
We were in business and everything. Yeah,
for rolling out technology or rolling out whatever.
Yeah,
New Zealand was a testing ground,
and that plays out when you see, you know, how many things we're first in. You know, New Zealand has a lot of firsts, and are considered quite well advanced when it comes to business and you know, sustainability. New Zealand is seen as quite an advanced country in that light.
Oh, we're just a utopian society.
We are.
Of course.
Yes.
Why did we ever leave, Steve?
I know. And they make the best cheese and onion sandwiches.
God, I haven't had one of those for years.
I just want to go back to that bubble thing for a second. The Pacific Islands and the Cook Islands are actually citizens of New Zealand, right?
Yes.
So it makes sense that we open up to those islands sooner rather than later, because they're essentially innocent bystanders in a global event where they've got very little control over, and they've not had any cases for a wee while either.
And I've just got the name for our particular district or faction. It's called Amity, which is the peaceful one. So would you please join us in Amity?
Join us in Amity, where lockdown is salubrious.
I'm going to put my rugby hat on for a bit. And Steve, I think we're brothers because we've got the same, I have different hats as well. My rugby hat is quite a big hat. And I know they're talking about doing a Pacific, Australia, New Zealand Pacific, like rugby competition. And they've been talking about the Pacific Islands involved for so long, and they've been ignored for so long. So, you know, that's going to be a great for them as well to be part of that. It's going to be good for their economy. And, you know, no one's going to want to go to South Africa or, you know, to the UK or whatever, or they will do for short times. There'll be rugby tours again. All these big global competitions like the Rugby Championship won't be happening. They'll go on tours for a few weeks or, you know.
We need that. We need that so badly. Like, let's just talk mainstream for a second. Our three countries absolutely need to travel the shit out of each other. You know, And if I go to Australia and get any shit from any Australians for being a Kiwi, I'm like, fuck you guys. We're the only country that's allowed in. Give me a break, you know?
How sick are we going to get of each other, right? So not another fucking New Zealander, not another fucking Australian.
That bridge, That bridge.
Yeah. That's right. Build a bridge. That's cool. Well, look, guys, we're meeting our natural ending as we sense it. Is there any how do we find you if you're a listener? Just to recap from the beginning again for YeahYeahYeahNahWhat.
iTunes, YeahYeahYeahNahWhat with a question mark, and also on Spotify. I think there's also some Twitter and some Instagram and some Facebook things floating around. I think if you just put YeahYeahYeahNahWhat in Google,
one word,
you can find us, and all my stuff's usually like Stephen J. Hunter. That's all my bits and bobs. So that's where you find us, and you find Jeanene in Melbourne, and you find me in
and I'll
Australia.
probably be in a cafe from now on, or a pub. My goal for the week is to have a poured beer from a tap.
Nice. See if you can convince someone to pour it for you.
No, we can go to pubs now.
Okay. So you're not just walking the streets with a bottle going, could you pour this for me?
Excuse me, can someone pour me a beer? Yeah, no, it's quite legal now. So
brilliant.
But actually, why didn't I think of that previously? I would have been up for that challenge to get it done before it was allowed.
Yeah, actually, that'd be really interesting. Approaching people with a mask. Could you pour this for me? Well, look, guys, thanks so much for being on our show. Hopefully we can be a guest on yours one day. It was a real pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, real pleasure chatting with you.
We'd love it. Absolutely love it. And thanks for having us.
Much. What an honor. And yeah, we've got 2 listeners, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Cheers,
Thanks, guys. Thank you.